Now, as you may recall last week, the master Abraham had told his servant that he is to go to a land, specifically, he was to go to his household, Abraham's household, up in Mesopotamia, and to find a wife for his son Isaac. As you may recall, the servant, he prayed that he would have a very specific sign as to who he was to set up Isaac with. And he had not even completed his prayer when all of a sudden Rebekah shows up on the scene, and she is a direct answer to that servant's prayer. And what does he do? He gives thanks to the Lord. He puts gold, tons of gold on her, over 3 pounds. And here we see her running into the house. Okay. Now, I want you to just imagine being in the shoes of her brother and her mother. You're just kind of going about your day, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you're reading a book. Maybe you're watching television, but all of a sudden, Rebekah comes running in and she has all this gold on her. What are you going to do? You're going to immediately begin to question, where did that come from? How did you get that? Did you steal it? What is all of this gold that you have coming in, running into the house? So naturally, Laban, her brother, is going to take notice of the gold. And he tells the servant to come on in when he hears that the servant was the one that gave her the gold. Again, the servant is probably Eleazar. Gave her the gold. He says, come on in. I want you to wash up and to eat because it is already evening. Now, this servant, being extremely wise, doesn't immediately accept this offer. Instead, he says, I want to tell my business first. In other words, he didn't want to feel obligated to do anything just in case they were going to say no, right? He says, let's talk about this. So then he goes into his long story. He's basically repeating what we had seen earlier in Genesis about how he is obligated to his master to find a spouse for the master's son, how he had prayed, how she showed up and did exactly as he had prayed, that the sign would be clear that she is the one. But he also goes on to talk about Abraham's wealth in verse 35. He talks about how Abraham is very rich. He has this gold, he has silver, he has servants, he has all sorts of maidservants. And you could just imagine being Laban when he hears rich. What does Laban do? He starts leaning in. I could just see him saying, tell me more. And then he adds that, okay, not only does my master have all of this wealth, but guess who his sole heir is? His sole heir is his son Isaac. And this is the gentleman that we're asking that you will give Rebekah to. So you can just imagine with all of this, going on, how Laban has to be extremely interested in what he's saying. But then at the very end of the servant's speech, he asked for Rebekah's hand in marriage. And that is where we pick up in verse 50. Laban and Bethuel replied, the matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you bad or good. So it's really hard to tell at this point what they were thinking. Okay, they clearly were recognizing that, hey, this is someone that could take care of Rebekah. And just knowing Laban, of course, at this point, we haven't seen how he acts around Jacob, but we will. He might have been thinking to himself, you know what? maybe there's a little bit of something for me in this relationship. But we don't know if that was what was going on or if he was just simply being really polite, because we don't know if he had a true religious conviction or not. But what we do know is that he's listening. He's saying that, okay, this might be from the Lord. It may or may not be, but we cannot make that call. We are going to say yes. And it was all because of the servant had asked for Rebekah's hand in marriage. Now, here in the U.S., it is a custom that you go as a man and you ask for the parents to have their daughter's hand in marriage. How many of y'all have done that? Okay, well, I would think we'd see more guy hands coming up. Okay, but yes. But the thing about it is we know that's a custom, but where have we ever really looked into why? Why do you do that? Do you simply do that because everyone else is doing it, or that's what you've been told? Or are there particular reasons why you should do it? So I'm going to give you about 5 this morning, beginning in very first one, and that is it shows respect to the parents. Okay? When you're asking for that hand in marriage, you are saying, I respect you. I recognize that you have spent time with your daughter, that you have poured into her life, that there have been many years of love you have shown her. There has been sacrifice in your life, things you have had to give up in order for your daughter to succeed. And the guidance that you give her. In other words, the realization you may say no, right? But it is a form of respect to ask for the daughter's hand. Secondly, it is symbolic of two families coming together. Now, you always hear that when you get married, you not only marry the other person, but you also marry the family as well. And that is so true. So you need to make sure that you like the family, especially if they live close to you. Okay? Got to make sure that you like the family. And it's almost like you're showing humility and also respect, again, for that family, which you want to start off on the right foot to help foster goodwill and trust. So it's a joining of two families together. Thirdly, it demonstrates serious intentions for the relationship, and it also creates a meaningful memory. It says that, I am serious about this relationship, that this just goes beyond just casual dating. It says, I'm committed to caring for your daughter. And what's really cool about it is the stories that you hear about when the man goes and asks for the daughter's hand in marriage. And I'll share my story with you. And it's interesting, too, of course, having Bill here as I share it. So I was a college student. Okay, college students don't have money. Okay, let's just say what it is, all right? But I was going to ask Melissa, how do I get in touch with your dad? Which obviously she probably thought that was kind of strange. Why are you wanting to get in touch with my dad? But she's smart. She figured it out quickly. Okay. So I get his phone number and I ask him, hey, let's go have dinner. We go out to a Mexican restaurant. And let me tell you, at that point, Bill was 10 foot tall and bulletproof. Okay. It was absolutely terrifying. But I still cherish that conversation to this day that we had. He was able to provide insight, maybe some things that I hadn't thought about before saying yes. And when you're asking for the daughter's hand, it is creating, again, a memory that you are going to be able to cherish forever. And I'm sure many of you have stories just like that as well. Fourthly, I would say that it provides an opportunity for accountability with the parents. You see, they are going to offer wisdom and encouragement and also insight of things that you might not be aware of. They might share something with you that you might have to say, well, I don't know if I could reasonably live with that. One of mine would be, and thankfully it's not this way, would be mess. Okay, I cannot stand clutter. I cannot stand things that are just simply there and aren't being used. Either it has a purpose and it needs to stay there, or it needs to get out. Okay, but you might say, well, that's something I could live with. So there's all sorts of things that they could share with you. It might even be something like, well, do you realize how slow she is? In other words, when you're ready to go somewhere, they're still just kind of dawdling around, taking their precious time. Can you live with that? All these sorts of things. So definitely they're able to give insight that you might not have thought of, also to give you some wisdom, maybe some things that have been challenges or struggles in their marriage that they can now relate back to you. I would say, fifthly, that it invites blessing rather than permission. The conversation, of course, is much less about asking because you pretty much have already made up your mind at this point, at least you should have, but it's more about seeking the parent's blessing and support. It's saying that, I really want you to support this relationship. I care about your daughter, and I really need your blessing. I really, need you to help me when times do get tough. And I think that it also recognizes the daughter's independence while still honoring the parents. So here, that is, again, 5 things, 5 takeaways for asking for the hand in marriage. So we know now, okay, this is why you do it. But then what is the response from the parents? And we're going to look at how Rebekah's family responded and ultimately gave her the blessing. Look at verse 52. It says, when Abraham's servant heard their words, so in other words, they'd said yes, he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. And when he hears this, the very first thing he does is he gives thanks to the Lord. Why is that? Because he's recognizing that this is something that God has ordained, that God has put together. And this had to be a significant relief to him because he was probably thinking this whole time, what if she says no? But instead, they agree. And when they agree, he begins to bring out this dowry. He begins to give them all sorts of articles of silver and gold and garments. And he gave them to Rebekah, and he also gave these precious things to her brother and to her mother. Now, of course, gold and silver, certainly something that we would here in the U.S. and recognized as something that's extremely valuable, but also clothing, okay? You can't just run out to Costco during that day and get your clothes, right? Okay, in this particular case, or some other place, in this particular case, he's given them these clothes because everything had to be handmade. So you could just imagine the blessing that this had to be to her family. This is the dowry. This is saying, okay, I thank you so much for saying yes. Please take these items. We appreciate it. And what did they do? Well, they began to try to delay. They began to try to hold on and keep her there just a little bit longer. And they say this, they say, Verse 55, let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10, and afterwards she may go. The servant comes back and he says, okay, let's do not delay this. Let's get on with this. And I just tell you right now, this servant had to have been ready to get home, okay? He'd been traveling a long way. He's like, you know what? I'm ready to go. Let's get this done. Let's do not delay this any longer. So then they reply, okay, well, we are going to call her in and consult her wishes. And what does she do? Well, when they're trying to delay this trip, she immediately ends the debate. And all she simply says is, and I love this, her faith, she says, I will go. I will go. Now, here we are seeing some very strong parallels between Rebekah and Abraham. Okay? Abraham, as you may recall, was asked to go to a land that God was going to show him. And it is in that land he would be made a mighty nation, that he would be a blessing to others within that land. And it was all sight unseen. He had to have an enormous amount of faith to be able to leave the comforts of his home, which, by the way, same area where Rebekah is, to step out and say, I will go. And here we are, seeing this young lady who has lived in the same area all her life, who is at the comforts of her family, the convenience of the city, now saying that she is willing to go with this servant and to become married. This is an enormous amount of faith that Rebekah has. And here we see Rebekah's life going to be a complement to Isaac, who Isaac, as we're reading through here, seems much more passive. She says, I will go. And here, they begin to offer their blessing. They begin to bless her. They say, okay, well, you can take your nurse with you, which we know later on from chapter 35, verse 8, that this is Deborah. It says, take your nurse with you. And then they give her this blessing. It says about Rebekah, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s. In other words, blessing her womb. And may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. So in other words, that she would be greatly blessed, and may the offspring that comes from her be protected against those who are going to seek to do them harm. That is the blessing. And let me tell you, anybody that's following the news will notice there are always those seeking to do her offspring harm, the Israelites. So we see even back then, here she is asking, they are asking for God to bless. And as soon as they give her this blessing, as soon as they give her the okay, she gets up with her maids, gets on these camels, and begins to follow the man. So here we know why he had brought 10 camels. He was anticipating that she was going to say yes, that God was going to be faithful and direct him to the lady that was for Isaac. So we talked about how he had asked for her hand. But then when you are asked by that young man for your daughter's hand, what is the response? And here is the takeaways for this. Very first one is that no parent should ever give their blessing blindly, okay? But rather, they should take the time to get to know the potential spouse. Get to know that person. Try to spend some time alone, if you can, away from your daughter or away from your son, to where you can know, okay, what is this person like when they are away? Because let's face it, sometimes it is very difficult to really get to know the person while your child is also there, because who are they focusing on? Your child, right? But find activities that you can do together. If you're a man, spend time with the young man. If you are a woman, spend time with the young woman to try to get to know them before saying yes. Second thing, in offering the blessing, it is a recognition of God's work in the life of the couple. It is to say that you're seeing evidence of the Christian character that you've been trying to nurture in your child. You can see that they are maturing, and it is to show genuine love that God has bringing this together. It's almost to give some reassurance. And sometimes people are just needing assurance when they are heading down the right path. That is the key phrase. When they are heading down the right path. In other words, when they have found the right one, it's always nice to get a little bit of assurance. But if it's not the right one, say something. Say something. Make it known, but do so in a loving way. But when we say yes, when we see that God is at work in that couple, when we see that God is brought them together, I think it also demonstrates trust in that child. It is to say, okay, you have reached adulthood. You are at the point where you can make significant life decisions, and it gives them a form of confidence rather than control. It is an encouragement to your child when you see that they are doing the sort of things, they are finding the spouse that they should be looking for. One that will, again, help them in their walk with the Lord. I think it also, fourthly, strengthens the relationship between families. When you're giving that blessing, it helps remove that tension that might be there. And it shows that other person, it says, hey, I support you. I support you. And having that support from that family can be huge, because it says, I care about you. I am right here with you. I am someone that if you need help, if you're going through struggles, you can come to me. So it is, again, a form of support when offering the blessing. In fact, it also, fifthly, provides emotional support to that couple. When it comes time to marry, there is a lot of excitement. How many of you were excited about getting married? Those of you that are married, right? Pretty good. All of us, okay? If you weren't excited, then we probably need to talk after service, okay? But you're excited about it. But there's also a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that you simply do not know, okay? How are we going to pay the bills? Where are we going to live? How are we going to handle disagreements? All these sorts of things, okay? And they need to know, hey, this is people, they've offered their blessing, and I can come to them and talk if I need to, right? And that's what we see here. It's providing emotional support to the couple, because guess what? There are going to be hard times, right? Anybody that's been married knows that there are hard times, okay? It's not always that wonderful feeling that you have at the beginning, right? It sometimes goes back to commitment. And ultimately, when we're looking at this, and we're looking at this relationship between Isaac and Rebekah, we know that this relationship is ordained by God, and it is based on love. So third thing, their marriage was ordained by God. In other words, God put it into place, and it was ultimately based on love. So you can just imagine the scene here, how this is going down. So here you have the servant, you have Rebekah, you have 10 camels all showing up while Isaac is meditating in the field. Okay. Now, we don't know exactly what he was meditating about. Maybe he just needed a timeout and to be able to think about things, right? And it's funny, as a kid, you don't ever want to be put in time out. But as an adult, you're like, time out, please. Yes, I'll go to time out. I can take a little break. And I think that's what we see Isaac doing. He is now in the Negev. In other words, it doesn't look like he's living in the same place as Abraham is. He's there in the Negev area, kind of South Israel. He's meditating, and it's at this place called Bir Laha Roy, which you may recall is the name that was given to it from Hagar when she simply proclaimed that place as the well of the living one who sees me. And I think there is some symbolism here that we see. That here we have before was the illegitimate child from Abraham, but here we see the child of promise at this land that God has given him, and now God is also going to provide for him a spouse. And we don't know how long he had actually been there, right? He could have been there a long time. This could have been a practice that he had, but we do know that he is out, meditating. He's probably thinking about his mother's passing. He's probably wondering, my gosh, where is that servant? When is he going to show up? I mean, that's what I would be doing, okay? But he shows up there, and as it's happening, it says, verse 63, he lifts his eyes and he looked, and the camels were coming. So he's looking up. And then Rebekah begins to also lift her eyes. So she starts looking up. And you have to wonder if at this point, if there was some sort of like communication, like visually, to where they just see each other. And she sees Isaac. She gets down from her camel, and she goes to the servant, and she simply asks this question, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? Okay. Now, keep in mind, he didn't have a Polaroid. He didn't have a social media account where the servant can say, there he is. So this is the first time that she is beginning to see her future husband, as well as it is his first time to be seeing her. What a powerful moment. She asks him, and then the servant tells her, he says, he is my master. So he is the one I have been telling you about. He is the one that is extremely wealthy. He is the child of promise. He is the one that God is going to make a mighty nation, and that you are the one to marry him. Can you imagine the excitement? What she must have felt that, okay, it is true. All these things that we have heard from this servant, I can now see it. And she gets down and she takes her veil and she begins to cover herself. And I think this is very symbolic of a wedding veil, to where you just simply see her eyes. So there she is standing. And the servant goes and he tells Isaac all that has been done in verse 66. So he probably recounts the long story again about how he was praying, how she showed up, and it was just as the sign he had prayed to happen, and now she is here. Can you imagine his excitement? I mean, there she is, and he was probably still struggling from his mother's passing. In fact, from a few verses down, we know that to be the case, but there she is. the Bible tells us that he took her into her mother Sarah's tent, and it was there that she became his wife. And I love this little phrase that's right after that. It simply says, he loved her. That phrase speaks volumes. Their marriage, from the very beginning, was based on love. Yes, God ordained it, but it was based on love. He loved her. Love truly at first sight. And these are the takeaways here that we learn from this passage. Very first one is that love is the basis for lifelong commitments and reflect God's design for marriage. Love is the basis. You cannot have a true God-honoring marriage if it is based on anything else than love. It can't be based on money. It can't be solely based on money, attraction. It can't be based on just wanting companionship. It has to be based on love. And we see this at the very beginning of their marriage. It's meant to be a lifelong commitment. But at the end of the day, it is a commitment because you see that in marriage, feelings are going to fluctuate. Okay? There are going to be times where if you're just honest, you say, you know what? I don't like the other person. Okay? It's going to happen. There are times where Melissa does not like me. Please don't say amen. Okay? There are going to be times where you have to go back to that commitment that you made before the Lord, that you made before your family, and say, God, you brought us together. You are going to have to help us to get through the difficult seasons. And when we look at love, that is ultimately what gets us through those seasons. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8, it talks about love being patient and that love is kind. It is not jealous, that love does not brag, and it certainly is not arrogant. And if you want to see where you stand, if you'll pull that back, verse 4, one more time. If you want to see where you stand in that relationship, take your name and place it where it says love. Am I patient? Only you can answer that. Please, nobody out loud. All right? Am I kind? Do I ever get jealous of my spouse? Do I ever somehow think that I'm better than my spouse? Verse 5. Do I do things that are unbecoming of our relationship? In other words, do I do things that I should not be doing? Do I have relationships with people of the opposite sex that I should not have? Do I look at things I should not look at? Am I bringing shame to our marriage by talking poorly about my spouse? Those are the sorts of things that are unbecoming. Am I seeking my own, or am I truly looking out for my spouse and what is best for them? Or am I also, and this is one that I've seen many couples have, keeping a list of the way that the spouse had wronged them and then bringing it back up later? That is not what marriage is intended to be. Because here's the thing. When we ask for forgiveness, when we ask God for forgiveness, guess what he does? He forgives us. That doesn't mean that you forget, but that does mean that you don't constantly bring those old arguments back up in that relationship. Love does not do those things. Now, what love does do, secondly, is it endures difficult times and encourages self-sacrifice. You see, every marriage is going to face some form of a challenge. It might be a financial pressure. You're not sure how you are going to be able to afford the bills, and you can't immediately start blaming the other person. It may be health issues. There'll be times where you have to walk alongside your spouse when they are struggling with something that they truly cannot help, some sort of help. There's even going to be seasons where there's disagreements and that there might be certain disappointments, but genuine love will ultimately help couples persevere together. You see, because true love is seeking the good of that other person. And if you're seeking the good of that other person, it is going to come at self-sacrifice. Sometimes you are going to have to put your desires, what you wish would happen, you will have to set them aside in order to help that spouse achieve their goals and their dreams. Is that the easy thing to do? Not always, but if you love that other person, you will do that for them. You see, when you're thinking about that other person and you're putting them first and in all things and in all areas of your life and you're self-sacrificing, you are also living very Christ-like because that is what Jesus did for us. And again, ultimately, as you might have heard me pray, marriage is not meant to make us happy. That is a false view. It's nice when it happens, yes, but it's ultimately designed to make us holy, to help us be made into the image of Jesus Christ. That is what it's meant to do. Now, not only does it endure difficult times, but it also produces kindness and respect, and it promotes good communication. A loving relationship is one that is marked by a mutual respect and honor for that other person. And without that, there cannot be a healthy marriage. That spouse should know that you care about them, that you want to see that you have their best interest in mind. And if they do, that helps make that marriage bond stronger because it says, hey, I care about you. I care about you, and that spouse knows it. And when true people truly love one another, they are more willing to listen to each other. They're also more willing to forgive each other and to work through conflicts rather than solely focusing on trying to win the argument. Okay? Good communication is not focused on how am I going to win this argument. It's to take that time to hear that other person's point of view and saying, hey, let's work through this together. That is what good communication between two people that love each other should be. All of these things also adds to a home where future children can flourish. In fact, love nurtures future children. It forms a stable and nurturing home environment. And that benefits children. In other words, when you have that two people that love each other in that home, children are benefited three different ways. First one, I would say, is educationally. Education, okay? It has been proven that children that come from a stable home, they earn higher grades, they graduate from high school, and they are also more likely to finish college than don't. It also benefits emotionally. Children that come from stable homes, they have fewer behavioral problems. They develop better socially and emotionally, and they are also more emotionally stable themselves. So it benefits educationally, it benefits emotionally, but then also, I would say, economically, in the sense that those children are less likely to experience childhood poverty and have greater economic security, and also are more likely to have a higher income than those that do not come from such a home. And I realized in speaking about this that we are in a broken and fallen world. All these things that we've talked about here, they are ideal. These are the sorts of things that we try to aspire to, that we ask God to help us. But not all of us have had these things. Not all of us have had parents that truly love each other and may have affected us even into adulthood. I think some of you know this as well, that I come from a broken home. And ultimately, it is God that can give us the strength to be able to show our children this is how a couple loves each other. Might not have had that in your life growing up, but you can be the example. You can be the example to your children to help them to be able to thrive. And when we think about all of these things, and we see this love, it is my prayer today that we will learn to better love our spouses the way God has called us to do. And that also, when we have a young man who comes in one day and asks for our daughter's hands in marriage, that we're able to say, you know what? I support you. I'm here for you. You have my blessing. And that is one of those things we want to be able to give to all of our children, is to have spouses that love the Lord and are truly going to lead our child to do the same.